Hello! Today's topic isn't specific to League of Legends, but I see this echoed around the League of Legends community the most, probably because I spend most of my time in the League of Legends community, and League of Legends community has a lot of writers in particular. A sentiment I see echoed a lot in the community, the League of Legends esports community, of journalists, either by people in the scene or trying to get into the scene, is that there is an oversaturation of feature writing. Feature writing is when, and believe me, I looked this up in several different sources because I do not have a rigorous journalistic background, is when you tell a more human side to the story. You focus on narration, you discuss context, things like this, and you really want to make people kind of feel something with this. This is kind of a branch of journalism that's an outlet for people to connect with the subject matter emotionally, to kind of get close and more personal with the person in question. Obviously, there are successful feature writers in the League of Legends community, including people like Fiona on Fire and Emily Rand, who have done really well with this kind of thing. But do I think that there is an oversaturation of feature writing in general? To say there is an oversaturation of feature writing is to say that there is an oversaturation of stories. There are so many stories in the League of Legends and the esports community more broadly to tell. It's also kind of like there's an oversaturation of entertainment media, is kind of what you're saying. An oversaturation of movies, TV shows, stories, books, novels, non-fiction stories, newspaper feature writing. Feature writing is so popular because people like that kind of entertainment. They like stories, they like emotional hooks, they like escapism, they like to feel connected to something that's not them for a few minutes. Now, this isn't rigorous at all, but particularly in esports, when I talk to people and I ask them, why are you really interested in this team? It's because I know a lot about the player, I've been following the story, I feel really connected. This is something that I hear a lot for people to not get interested in Chinese League of Legends, for example, is that they feel that the players are not accessible because they don't speak English, because there's not enough content written about their stories. And in my own path to writing, etc., is I've immediately started out with like analytical content, and I realized if I wanted to make people interested in that, I needed to make people kind of more interested in the stories of the LPL in general. So I tried to do a little bit of both from here and there. But overall, I don't primarily consider myself a feature writer. I consider myself someone who does more snippets or observations or talks about how this player affects this, or team dynamic, breaks down tiny lane swap elements or things like this, whatever. What is important, however, is that probably one of the easiest ways to get people to buy into esports is to tell a story, to write a narrative, or to have a video writing a narrative, to have a player talking about his narrative and his life. This type of content does really well for a reason. Esports industry in particular is really narrative driven. It's a lot like sports, right? We want to feel connected to their success stories. We want to see certain players succeed and do well. These are all very narrative based reasons to watch esports and for the industry to do well. It's like effectively you're selling glory. You're selling this concept of greatness. You're selling achievement when you're selling esports and observations of sports and things like this. So of course people like feature writing. Of course people like the narrative. They want, even if they know the player really well, they like it when someone breaks down his story, what he had to do to succeed, where he came from, all this other information that they maybe know by heart, but they want to feel connected to it anyway. I also feel like feature writing can't be oversold or oversaturated because there are still a lot of niches in feature writing that haven't been filled. One is interview features, which is something that Emily Rand has only started to get really good at and started gaining momentum in, and she really wants to get closer to people she can interview more often, do more of that kind of content, because feature writing, a lot of times in mainstream media, has a lot of interviews in it. It has quotes from the players, has quotes from the players' friends and family, has quotes from their teammates, things like this. So that is actually something that hasn't people haven't really gotten into that as well. They do Q&A interviews, which by the way, are almost always going to do better than a feature written article because people like QA. So this idea that feature writing is oversaturated is kind of ridiculous when I feel like this kind of QA interview format is much more oversaturated than a feature that's written out of an interview. There are also all sorts of angles in feature writing that haven't really been told. For example, in 1966, a really famous feature was Frank Sinatra Has a Cold by Gates Alisi. Originally, this guy didn't really want to do it, okay, but because everyone at the time was writing about Frank Sinatra, but his publication told him to go ahead and head over to LA and interview Frank Sinatra, do a feature on Frank Sinatra, because that was what was popular then. The guy heads there, he can't really interview Frank Sinatra because Frank Sinatra is sick. So instead, he spends a lot of time talking to Frank Sinatra's family, people around him, all these sorts of things, and he writes this concept piece about Frank Sinatra has a cold without actually interviewing Frank Sinatra. Certain features about players, families, and friends, things like that, have become more popular recently because there was kind of a gap in them before. Things about how the player's life was beforehand, things about maybe what players do after they're done playing as more players retire, what off-season is like for players, because I bet you could come up with a lot of interesting stories about that kind of thing, because there's a lot of really, really hard work that goes into the regular season, like this crazy grind, and then players and staff and people involved in teams go out of their minds during the off-season because there's very little to do. There are no games to watch, right? It's really weird. It's like there's this really condensed season and then there's nothing and people just don't know what to do with themselves. So stories like that haven't necessarily been told. Those could all make great features. So as soon as I can automatically think of a story that I haven't seen, there's no way that feature writing is oversaturated. It might be more appropriate to say that feature writing around the most popular players is a little oversaturated, but that's the kind of stuff that's still going to do better. If you want to tell the story about how Bjergsen became the best mid laner in NA, a lot of people told that story, but it still gets upvoted to Reddit front page every time. Maybe I might think that kind of story is oversaturated, but obviously the public doesn't. They still want to hear it because they love that player so much and they like to see that story told. Maybe not even told like the best every time, but just the concept to relive the moments of watching him like that. But really, when it gets down to it, I don't actually see that many like strict features written. That I mean like narrative human pieces that tell about glory, about things like this. What I am much more likely to see are like what I would refer to as soft analysis pieces. Okay, breaking down head-to-head matchups and things like this. I know Tyler does a lot of great narrative work, but he also does stuff like this, where he says, okay, KT versus SKT, top, jungle, mid, ADC, support. That's kind of like this really quick snapshot, soft analysis stuff. Tim7Houston does this a lot. He might get mad at me for calling it soft analysis, but where he posts like a snapshot of the statistics of the player and writes an article off of that. These kinds of articles are actually what I see way more than feature writing. And I also see a lot more Q&A interviews or video interviews. I feel like this content is much more popular or much more upvoted, much more oversaturated, and I see more stuff like this. When I ask people to submit their work, or when I go looking for work, and maybe it's because it's me and I do more analytical stuff or something, but I feel like even when I'm just browsing websites like Gamers, I see a lot more new articles that are kind of like these sort of soft analysis type pieces and not really feature writing, okay? So I feel like feature writing is not even the most popular type of content that's being produced the most. If you go on Reddit at Worlds, when it's easier to get access to players just with a small publication, maybe you're not as popular as a journalist, it's a lot easier to get player access then. So it will be wall-to-wall interviews, just like quick 5-minute interviews, whatever you can get at Worlds. That kind of content, I think, is much more oversaturated than feature writing. And since it is so popular and still so highly demanded, it's still really hard to call it oversaturation. You want to say it's oversaturated in terms of it's kind of hard to make yourself stand out writing it. You know, you're a dime a dozen, everyone's competing to get recognition doing this, to establish themselves, to create a consistent stream of content, to get the next big job, to get the higher freelance contract, those types of things, and that's a different conversation. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of mean when they talk about this. But the reality is that when you want to start out in the scene as a new esports journalist or a new esports writer, or you're best off writing features or writing soft analysis pieces and trying to establish a steady stream of content like that. If you establish a name for yourself, making those types of articles don't necessarily require player access. They don't necessarily require collaboration with organizations, that don't necessarily require you to have a publication behind you. It's a lot easier to get noticed and to get those types of things and to get the reputation that requires you to do a different type of work. If you want to get into investigative journalism, you might be better off just writing quick, short narrative pieces, right? The organizations start to know who you are if it gets upvoted, and people will say, okay, but how do you make yourself stand out doing this? People ask me a lot about how to get into esports writing and esports journalism, and I don't usually give very, very helpful answers because I feel like the most helpful answer I could possibly give anyone, and this really is the best answer, is just keep doing it. Write something once a week. You'd be surprised how many people have asked me for this type of advice, and I've said write a piece, an article, something once a week, and people just don't do it. It's really, really weird. Like, you need to keep up a steady stream of content. Maybe not every article will be great. Maybe not every article will be Pulitzer eligible, whatever. Keeping up a steady stream of content, no matter what it is, will eventually get people to notice that, hey, this person is producing something every once a week. This person is like really excited about this. And not only that, maybe if you start out and you're complete and utter shit, like I am. A lot of my original articles, the original things that I wrote in general were complete and utter shit that I kept writing, and maybe I still produce a lot of complete and utter shit. And I don't even consider myself super well established, so maybe this advice is bullshit, but if you just keep writing something every week, you will stand out, because people don't do that. It's really weird. You'd be surprised. I hear this comment all the time about how there's an oversaturation of a type of writing or a type of content, when the reality is that there's like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people who are responsible for this quote-unquote oversaturation, because there aren't a lot of people who are consistently doing it. Everyone has lives, everyone's super busy, yeah. But I had that problem too. A lot of people have that problem too. If it's something that you really want and you're really into, you should, first of all, have no problem coming up with an idea or something to write about every week, even if you don't have access to players, even if you can't interview someone every week. Because if you get into the industry and you find yourself successful and you run out of ideas, you're kind of screwed. Second, if it's something that you really want to establish yourself in, something that you really want to spend your life doing and making money doing, you find time to do it anyway. Now, I'm sure I've just insulted a lot of people who've been producing stuff every week and no one's paid attention. I'm sorry, but my best advice is just to keep doing what you're doing, because eventually you'll stand out just by your sheer consistency. And once you've established a reputation writing soft analysis pieces or narratives, you can do a whole lot of other stuff. And it won't give you just interview access, it might give you organization access if you want to start breaking news stories. It might give you access to people who understand the League of Legends API and can help you get data and write more rigorous statistical articles or things like this. Brings me to my next topic, which a lot of times I see this comment brought up as they're all feature writers and no one is writing good statistical analysis or good statistics pieces or good analytical articles. There are a lot of people writing analytical articles. As someone who's kind of spent a lot of time like counting words and watching how words are placed and pathing junglers and running these through statistical software like Stata, using Excel spreadsheets, and all to create like these observations and to mince them down and to come up with like these refined sorts of points. These types of articles exist, and it's not just me writing it, so you could just say that my writing in this instance is shit. But there are a lot of people who do that kind of stuff, and it just doesn't get upvoted. It's not popular. It's really dense, and you don't really have a buy-in. Part of the problem that I think exists with writing in general in esports is because there is a high demand for video right now. A lot of this comes from esports itself, right? A lot of this comes from the fact that you watch League of Legends, it's a very visual experience. You have a lot of colors. Riot has done a really good job breaking down the shades and making everything clear, and people really want that kind of visual feedback. Shorter attention spans, people watch YouTube videos. There's not necessarily a need to read as much stuff. So a lot of times, if you want to generate interest in a subject, you need someone else to generate it for you in a visual medium, and then write about it. It happens a lot. So like my most successful written articles will be about something that's already popular, right? will be about something that people are already talking about. It's a general feedback loop. Reddit will vote things with titles and things they agree with, things that they already care about. So it's hard. I think it's possible, and I think really, really good writers will do it. But you have to kind of do it in a title, right? You have to make people care about your topic in a title, with the way Reddit works and the way esports journalism is really dependent on a medium. I think that that's easy to do in feature writing. I think that that's easy to do in more soft analysis work, especially if you're covering a topic that people already care about. My main thing is that maybe we aren't seeing an oversaturation of feature writing. Maybe what we're really seeing an oversaturation of is the same topic that we already care about, which is why I encourage people to get off Reddit, to go look up other stuff. But there's only so much I can do that about. Anyway, if you want to be a feature writer, if you want to do feature writing, let people saying that there's an oversaturation of that type of content discourage you, because one, there isn't, and two, people love that stuff anyway.